Hi, everybody. My name is Alex, and today I want to talk about Pluto transiting through the sixth house. This transit has been going on in my life for the past 11 years, and it will be going through for a further 6 years. So, today I want to share my personal experience of what has happened thus far and also tips on how to survive this transit. I'm going to be focusing on the key themes of the sixth house, those being health, work, daily routines, and pets, with a few more smaller themes as well. So I'll cover them each theme by theme. And then at the end of each theme, I'm going to basically give you the silver lining of what's happened in those different areas of my life and how to go from being disempowered, because Pluto is about power, how to go from being disempowered to being empowered. The way that I see this Pluto transit is anything in your life, if you think about your daily routine, so like what I mentioned before, be it work, paid or unpaid, be it your health routines, what you're eating, exercise, etc., etc., whether you have pets that you take care of, and so forth. All of those things, are they the building blocks to a foundation for the life that you want? Or are they destructive and unhelpful, and therefore you're not able to build the foundation that you need to live the life that you want? So the disparity between those two is what Pluto goes in and wants you, forces you to transform. So Pluto is trying to help you, is my interpretation of it. Although Pluto is ruthless and will do so in a way that takes no prisoners. Let's just put it that way. So I think we should get started. I'm going to start with Pluto going through the sixth house in relation to work and employment for me. With work, prior to this transit, I had a stable job. Things were going fine, good. And it was the longest that I had ever been in one job. And most of the time I was doing full-time hours as well, or close to full-time. So when this transit hit, I didn't immediately lose my job or leave my job or anything drastic like that. But what did happen is I suddenly had these clear realizations where I was just struck like, oh my God, this job, I deserve more than this job, you know? I deserve better than this job. And I saw it really for what it is rather than, I think prior to this transit, I had like a little bit rose tinted glasses on. So it was basically, and these came, I would say, in about 2 or 3 waves that kind of just washed over me. And I was like, oh my goodness, this job is no longer okay for me. I guess that I outgrew it. And it's it was confronting. It was not sort of it was, let's say, it was confronting, and it was in my face kind of when these realizations came over me. But at the same time I felt empowered because it was like, yeah, I do deserve better than this. However, I was I guess not ready and like a little bit scared to take that next step of actually taking action to change my situation. And also, like, I was working in an industry I was working in a corporate job, and it was at the time it was quite difficult for me to think, oh, I'm going to go from corporate into what wellness and health, completely different. Anyway, so it took me about a year and a half of this transit being active because it did go back into retrograde. So it was actually over a 2 year period because it went retrograde for 6 months. But it took me that long to actually pluck up the courage, I suppose, to actually uh, trans transform from just awareness into actual action. Um, so that did eventually happen, and I left that job. And then after that, I'm going to say that I have not had a stable job since then. And there are reasons for it, Plutonian reasons for it, let's say. Um, I did probably in the past 11 years, I've done, let's say, 6 different permanent type jobs and about 5 temporary jobs. And none of them have lasted longer than, actually, no, none of them have lasted. I did stay in one job for nearly 2 years, but that was very part-time. Um, and the way that my experience of work was different, other than the fact that I didn't have stable jobs, and the reason I didn't have they didn't turn into stable jobs was because of Plutonian type themes. So Plutonian themes are like power, secrecy, underhand, shadowy kind of business. But in particular, I'm going to focus on power struggles. So pretty much every work boss I've had since this transit, there has been some kind of intense power struggle between me and the boss or bosses. Whereas before this transit, when Pluto was in my fifth house, I never really had a problem with bosses and people in like authority positions above me. Um, they always really liked me and I was in their good books, not because I was a suck up or anything like that, but just because, I don't know, they just liked me and I liked them and there was never an issue and they always had my back and I was good. It just, yeah, it happened without trying. But come this transit, that completely went out the window. And it was a really new and unfamiliar experience. But that is what happened. And I guess I kind of got used to it because it kept happening. Um, I suddenly, was no longer appreciated for the work that I did. And trust me, in all my jobs, I have in this transit, I've put in like 150% and given my heart and soul to the job and trying to make it work and being a good employee and so forth. But despite that, it has not worked out. And the reason I left all of these jobs quite quickly was because I started experiencing massive burnout. So when I'm talking about burnout, what I mean is where the job begins to erode your mental health and your physical health to such a degree that it starts to slowly or not so slowly kill you. Um, I'll give an example perhaps to make that a little bit clearer. So I was going hard in this new job that I had, and I was not coping emotionally with the job, primarily because of power struggles with the bosses, and it was an extremely toxic environment also that I was working in. So, and my anxiety, like I already struggle with anxiety, but when I got this job, my anxiety just went absolutely through the roof. So much so that I ended up on antidepressants. The reason this antidepressant medication that I went on was for anxiety, because depression and anxiety are like two sides of a coin. At least that's how it was described to me by the psychiatrist that put me on these meds. And I have been a person who has said no to antidepressants for 20 years, even though other people have tried to push me to take them. So I was only, I think, in the job for maybe 4 or 5 months before I started this medication. I also, during this job, developed very bad insomnia. The job was 2 days a week, concurrent days. And so the day before my work week started, I usually got 2 to 3 hours sleep. And then the next, and so, it was difficult for me to work under 2 to 3 hours, and I don't drink caffeine. So I couldn't resort to that or anything else for that matter. And then the following day, I'd probably get like maybe 3 or 4 hours sleep. So, and this happened for 2 years. I also, during the rest of the week, because this job took it out of me so much, I ended up just not having enough bandwidth to deal with the rest of my life. So basically the whole of my life. And I also developed depression eventually, and so on and so forth. I was an absolute wreck. So that's the type of, that's sort of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about burnout. Eventually that type of existence can lead to much more serious problems, like suicidal ideation and so on. So every job that I had pretty much sent me into massive burnout. And after I left the job, I'd have to take time off and not work at all in order to recover from the burnout. And during that time, I would just be completely incapacitated, like lying in my bed, unable to get up type of vibes. One other thing I want to say with these jobs is that oftentimes they just ended kind of like a bit of a bomb went off, like a Plutonian. Pluto was very intense and just kind of explosive. So it'd be like, la 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 la, everything's kind of normal, and then one day, bang, everything's just turns to, and I'm no longer working at that place. I didn't ever get fired. I'm just going to put that out there, but I did leave jobs. There were always like some kind of Plutonian themes going on in these jobs. In one particular instance, one of my bosses was a micromanager, and she was extremely controlling. I had never been under a helicopter boss before, and it was like, yeah, she put this massive pressure on me, and it did not work. And the other boss that I had in the same place actually was very old school sleazy, and I hadn't really experienced much of that either prior to this transit. Not in this very like overt obvious way. And I felt like the reason I mentioned that is because Pluto rules the eighth house and it rules Scorpio. So all those kind of eighth house scorpionic themes, such as sexuality and shadowy energies and trauma and all that kind of thing, come into play. There wasn't any trauma that happened per se, but it's that type, that toxic type of energy. Also, there was times, when I did overtime that was unpaid. I did things that were, I guess, above and beyond my job description, but I was happy to do it because I cared and I wanted to try and help out. Um, so generally had a feeling of being used. Um, so not fun. One other thing I want to add is to do with co-workers. So this kind of energy wasn't only going between myself and bosses, but with co-workers as well. Prior to this transit, I was never interested in work politics before. I was just a kind of a person who didn't get involved and just tried to stay out of it and was kind of on my own planet, let's say. But in this transit, I became intensely interested in work politics because I wanted to be, I mean, it came from a good space, I wanted to be, I didn't want to avoid, I wanted to be present and I wanted to be a part of things. And I wanted to understand what was going on, I guess, on a deeper level. And have my own kind of say and so on in these places that I worked. And, in all these places that I worked, I wanted to contribute and kind of have uh, more of an even standing with everybody and be an active participant. But that didn't happen, despite my me trying to kind of instigate and initiate that. It was just shut down every time. But yeah, back to the co-workers, issues with co-workers as well. Not every single person, obviously, but there were definitely instances of, again, not being appreciated, being talked about behind my back, feelings of rejection and some bullying, unfortunately, as well. And just instances where things were not done in a tactful way when they could have been easily done in a diplomatic, tactful way. I am a Libra moon and Libra Mercury, and I like to be able to discuss things openly in a cordial way, but that was not happening. The other interesting thing is that in one job that I was in, there were a number of redundancies over a 2-year period. We went from a workplace of about 35 people down to 7. And I had to say goodbye to so many people. And it was really painful, Pluto rules beginnings and endings. And there were a ton of endings with all these redundancies. We're talking like 30, I don't know, 20, let's say 28 people or something were made redundant. And there was an element of secrecy involved in this because the people never knew until the morning of the day that they had to exit the building. I often knew the day before because of my role, but I wasn't able to say anything to that person or to anybody. So I had to keep it secret and private, which is a Pluto thing. And it was really painful. You never knew when these people would leave, and they obviously never knew. And it just hit them like a ton of bricks. Every single person was just distraught, as you can imagine. One day you have a job, next day, like, what are you going to do? you had to like pack up your stuff and just leave. And yeah, I thought that that was a, a very Plutonian thing to happen. Also, in another job, I had a friend, well, a person that I became very close friends with, and just one day out of the blue, bang, she's just decided to leave the company. Um, and it was really sad and difficult for me to cope with such an intense ending. It's like an ending that feels like just like ripping a paper and it's done and it's just discarded. It's a very kind of severe gut wrenching kind of feeling. Now, going over to the silver lining, the point of all of this, why can't I hold down a job? What is Pluto trying to tell me or tell you about, how work is being transformed in your life? And um, it might not be being transformed in the same type of way. Maybe you're being pushed in a completely different industry that you've wanted to go into since you were 20, but you were too scared to, or you felt that you didn't have, the right experience or the right credentials, but you could create an opportunity despite that. Or maybe you could go and study and get the credentials and then do it. So there are many different variations. I'm just talking about my firsthand experience because this is what I 100% know. Anyway, so for me, what this transit has been about is that Pluto is to do with power. When you're working for other people, they determine your work hours. At the end of the day, they determine your work hours. They determine your pay rate. They determine the days that you work. They determine the tasks that you do. And this whole transit has been pushing me to recognize and admit to myself that I don't do well working for other people, and the reason is because I don't want to work for other people. I want to work for myself, and I want to work in the field of creativity. So it's really interesting that all of these experiences have essentially been pushing me out of being an employee. Despite my best efforts, I said before that in every job I put in 150%. I did my absolute best. I went above and beyond. I killed myself to try and make the job work. But despite all of that, it didn't work. In fact, it made everything 100 times worse because I'd end up in burnout. And then I'd have to spend months, weeks, months recovering from the experience of that overexertion. And then to top it off, not getting any appreciation for the efforts that I've done and feeling rejected and misunderstood and all these negative feelings and all these negative experiences, piling up and up and up. So every time that I'd go into a new job, I'd kind of come in with a little bit of trepidation and fear. And, the more times that you have a bad experience, the less willing you are to throw yourself into that experience, right? Because why do you want to go through the same thing 10 times? Something's got to give, something's got to change, Anyway, so that has been my learning. It might not be the same for you. It's about, here I am, I'm feeling disempowered in these jobs, unable to stick to a job and without losing my physical and mental health. But what is the empowered version of that is like, actually, this doesn't work for me. This is not what I want to do. I want to work for myself. I want to be my own boss. I want to set my own work days, work hours, and my own rate. So I'm actively working towards doing that so that I don't have to go back into, something that is not going to work. And I've tried many, just to add a side note to this, it's not like I've just gone into the same type of job over and over again. I've actually tried various different jobs. So I went from corporate, I went into the wellness industry, trained as a yoga teacher, I worked as a yoga teacher. And I also tried to do some physical type labor jobs. That did not go down, and I'm going to talk about that next when I go into the health section as to why that didn't work. So I did try various different industries, and I did do various different study and got different credentials to try and just maneuver and find something that works for me. So now I want to move on to talking about health. So much in the same way that Pluto has forced me to transform the work element of my life, the same has also been happening to do with health. So if you look at your daily routines, because the sixth house rules daily routines in relation to health, look at your sleep. What time are you getting up? What time are you going to bed? How are you sleeping? Look at your foods. Are you eating healthy or not? What kind of exercise are you doing? And, what's your stress? What are your stress levels like? Do you do meditation or different things to help yourself out with your mental health? Health does encompass so many different things. I started off this transit, interestingly enough, a few days after, or a week tops after, I was diagnosed with a it's an autoimmune dermatitis. And it wasn't a shock so much that I got it because it runs in my family, but it was still a shock because, in the sense that it's rare to get it at my young age. Anyway, suffice to say, I was able to get diagnosed almost immediately and go on medication for it. So it was able to be managed and controlled. Pluto's been transiting my sixth house in Capricorn. And Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008. Just take that in for a second. Pluto's a very slow moving planet. It's been, it entered Capricorn 17 years ago. It is now in Aquarius, but for, most of that time it's been in Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. And so I've had a lot of health issues relating to Saturnian issues. So Saturn rules the skin. So this was a dermatitis that I was diagnosed with. It also rules the bones, the teeth. So I'm going to get into a description of how those things impacted me personally. And also it rules, let's say, the structure and the containment of your body. I mean, the skin contains your physical form, right? But also, like, what is your bone structure like? And I'm going to talk about my hypermobility, which has been a huge issue for me in my life and is completely related to Saturn. It's to do with stability. When you have hypermobility, you have unstable joints. You have an unstable frame of your body, an unstable structure. So I'm going to kind of just go through and list, generally speaking, different health issues that have come up. So you can get an idea of how literal this can be. And actually, one other thing I wanted to add to that is because Pluto is so much about the depths of our of our psychology, um, I have seen a very strong correlation between what's going in my life on a deeper psychological level and then what's going on physically in my life. And there is a very strong correlation between the two. And I was able to really see that firsthand in an undeniable way. Whereas before, perhaps I didn't, notice so much the connection between the two levels of my being. But it was like in this transit, I can just 100% see that things that are happening on a physical level are an expression and a direct result of what's going on for me psychologically. So an example of this is I actually, just to say also, during this transit, I was married and divorced. So again, beginnings, big beginnings and big endings. After I left this marriage, I found it actually extremely difficult to, I knew that it was the right decision, but it was very difficult I had a lot of things that I needed to process on a deep subconscious level. Shortly after I left, I got sick 3 times in relatively quick succession. They were all bugs relating to the digestive system. I've never had anything like that before. And the reason I mention it is because Pluto rules the colon. I'm not going to gross you out with the details, but there was an immediate response from what I was going through emotionally to how that manifested in physical form. Saturn also rules chronic health issues. And I've had chronic rhinitis my whole life, allergic rhinitis, like hay fever, but like all the time hay fever. So I did go to a couple of ENT specialists during this time, and I even did like desensitization therapy where they inject you with, I think, a bit of whatever you're allergic to. And it did make like a little bit of a difference for a few months, but then it went back to what it was, fortunately. And I'm still working through that. I think it's really important, any chronic issues that you have is don't ignore them. They're not going to go away. And for me, like I've tried to take suppressant medications like antihistamines. Okay, an antihistamine might work for like a few days, and then, I mean, might not be the case for everybody, but for me, I do an antihistamine for a few days, and then it no longer works for me. Then I have to move to a different one, and then I go to another one, and then another one, and you go to one, it doesn't work after a few days. You become can't remember what the word is, but you become kind of immune to it. So ultimately, it doesn't work. Pluto is not happy, is not satisfied with like a surface kind of band-aid approach. It wants you to actually go into the deep wounds and sort it out once and for all, because if you don't, it's going to continue to cause problems. And not only that, the problems are going to get worse. They're going to get deeper, and they're going to get harder to heal, and they're going to take longer to heal. And you might need, more extreme. You might need more extreme interventions to try and get on top of it. I was also during this time diagnosed with ADHD and autism, so I have ADHD. And I think that, ties in again with Pluto ruling the 8th house and ruling Scorpio, which rules therapists and psychologists and so on. So I did, off my own bat, go and say, hey, I think I have ADHD. Can you please test me for it? And the reason, like in both of these instances, I didn't in a million years think that I had either of these things, because I didn't understand actually what they even were, and I certainly didn't understand how they present differently in women. So that's been like a massive journey in itself, but it's helped me to understand myself on a much deeper Plutonian level. Also, during this transit, I discovered that I've got some arthritis in my like feet and hands. And, arthritis is like a chronic degenerative condition. I think largely it is to do with age. But hey, it's also the influence of Saturn. I don't know if everybody over a certain age starts to develop arthritis or not. Suffice to say, that is what happened to me. I've also had to deal with side effects of going on different medications. In the past, not anymore, but I used to be on ADHD medication. I am still on an antidepressant, which I'm tapering off of, and I'm now on a very, very minimal dose. But again, Pluto's like, hey, you can't just go on these medications and do a band-aid approach because it's not going to work long term. Because, hey, guess what? Every time you take a medication, there are side effects. I mean, it sucks, right? And this may not be the right choice for everybody. I'm not saying that I know what's best for you, but for me, with the medications, they were great for a while, but ultimately, the side effects for both of these medications have completely outweighed the positive effects. So I'm talking like intense insomnia. I'm talking intense anxiety. I'm talking, debilitating teeth grinding that ends up with just constant jaw pain. And I'm talking about decreased appetite, massively decreased appetite, where I wasn't able to get the nutrition that I needed for my body, and other effects as well. But, none of them are acceptable to me anymore. And Pluto wants me to go deeper, beyond the medication. What can I do to help myself with being ADHD? It just goes deeper. And I'm still on that journey. I also, on the recommendation of a dentist, I remember Saturn rules teeth. On the recommendation of a dentist, I got a frenectomy, which is doing a tongue tie release. It didn't actually make any difference in terms of it can contribute to a lot of muscular tension in the body. It didn't help that. And the reason I mentioned that is because, another chronic condition that I have is chronic muscular pain, and that is connected to hypermobility. So I guess this was sort of like a bit of a desperate attempt to, oh, hey, I'll try this as well, just in case it helps me with a chronic condition. It didn't, but what it did do on a positive note is that at the job that I was at, the long-term job that I was at, I think just from staring at the computer screens all the time, I developed a thing called migraine aura. It's gross. You kind of this migraine sort of comes over you, and then you see all these glassy kind of rainbow colored things on the side of your face. And you feel like you want to throw up. So as a result of doing that frenectomy, and I guess you could class the migraine aura, it did become a chronic condition because it was something that would happen, fairly often, and it wasn't going away anytime soon. But after this frenectomy, it completely went away. So, that's a blessing in disguise, an unexpected blessing. I also had to get a splint due to teeth grinding. Again, going back to teeth, rubbed my toes numerous times. Again, we're dealing with the bone structure of the body. And due to hypermobility, man, if you have hypermobility, you know what I'm talking about, but you can injure yourself from doing nothing. You could just turn around and injure yourself. So I'm going to get a little bit more into that soon. Um, and I also just wanted to mention that, again, to do with Pluto, eighth house and Scorpio, I have had like a focus on fertility type stuff. And also, because you've got to remember, Pluto is ruling the eighth house in Scorpio. So there will be eighth house scorpionic themes going through the sixth house as related to health. So, there were different issues that I had to do with, not to do with fertility, but to do with contraception. And again, actually, it comes back to side effects of the specific contraceptive that I was on. And, it was unacceptable to continue using this because of the side effects. And side effects were, and no one, a lot of these things I found are kind of common sense. But if you go to a GP, it's very rarely, at least in my experience, that the doctor's going to say, you know what, it's probably just because of blah, blah, blah. No one said anything to me about anything. And what's interesting is Pluto is about power, and it's about empowering yourself. And I have had to empower myself when it comes to my health, because no one is going to give you a magic pill and say to you, this is your problem. Here's the solution. Hell no. That has not been my experience. I've had to educate myself about anatomy. I've had to learn like what all the different muscles, the key muscles in my body are that I have problems with, and how to release them. How to identify them. And I only did that, because Pluto has forced me to teach myself how to know what is going on with my body, because no one's been able to tell me, what's wrong with me. And they certainly haven't been able to fix me. They've been able to give me like a Band-Aid kind of approach. And man, I have seen so many different practitioners. This is not just like, oh yeah, I've seen a couple of people and they weren't able to help me. I have a list of, I don't even know how many people here and how many different things that I've tried, both mainstream and alternative. It's not from not trying. And it's interesting also that, I decided to study, to get my certification as a yoga teacher during this time, since the sixth house rules health, and anatomy was a big part of our course. And I was able to, that kind of started my journey of learning about my body. Because, dude, I had like no idea what any muscles were, not really, or what any bone names were, or processes of the human body. Really, I was pretty like ignorant. But actually what ended up happening is I loved anatomy, and I still really love learning about the body. It's a fascinating subject. And I also just wanted to touch on, I had two family members during this transit who had issues with their bowel. Pluto rules the bowel. One family member a close family member had to get a portion of his bowel removed, and he was actually fine. He's since passed, but not to do with the bowel thing. And also I had another very close family member have a scare with her bowel, and but was able to luckily detect it early. So it was able to get fixed, and now it's just monitored. So yeah, that theme has run through as well. And I wanted to mention that my cat, he has had, like, I don't know what this is about, but he's had very similar health issues to me. I got him during this transit. I've had him for 5 years. And recently, like I always knew that he had bad teeth. I got him as a rescue cat. Recently, he had to have 13 dental extractions. He's fine. He's better than ever, actually, because he had rotten teeth in his mouth. And he also had an issue with eczema, which is gone now, thankfully, um, and chronic issues with chronic allergic rhinitis that I still, haven't figured out what's going on with that. So just interesting that, the patterns are not like only within me, but also with my cat. I've also had two family members, close family members, who have had, in one instance, colon cancer. He was luckily able to get a portion of his large intestine removed, and then he was fine. Later on, this person did pass away, not relating to that. And another close family member, she also had a colon cancer scare, but luckily she caught it in time and was able to have something removed so that it didn't develop into cancer. And now she's completely fine and just has to get it monitored on a regular basis just to make sure it's all good. I'm going to go into hypermobility now before I go into like the silver lining of. I've kind of already talked a little bit about that because it's about, empowering yourself to do with your health, but it's deeper than that also. There's more to it, let's just put it that way. I'm going to talk about it soon. So hypermobility. Man, I've had hypermobility my whole life. Has any practitioner that I've been to told me, hey, it's obvious that you have hypermobility. This is why you have chronic pain. What you need to do is strengthen your body, not keep stretching like you want to do because you're naturally stretchy and it feels good. It's actually unhelpful to stretch with hypermobility unless you're strengthening your body. So it's only really been in very recent times that I think because I've mentioned hypermobility, the physical therapist has been like, oh yeah, yeah. Although some people have just said to me, oh wow, you're really mobile. It's like, yeah, that's why I have so many issues. And I'm sure that there are many great physical therapists out there, but there are a lot of people that are uneducated, unfortunately, when it comes to hypermobility. What is it and how do you deal with it? You know what I mean? I've had to, through so much trial and error, finally get to the point where I'm like, okay, this is what I have. And the only thing that works for hypermobility for me is strength training. I have, unfortunately, because I wasn't strength training, all these things that I love, I love hula hooping, I love dancing. I actually also really love weight training. All these, I've also like tried to do CrossFit for a bit. Bad idea as a hypermobile person, because I'm not going to get into that. But suffice to say, all these things that I love, even just walking like in nature, have been problematic for me. I have injured myself doing all of these things and then not being able to do anything for weeks and more often months. At the moment, I'm so debilitated that I can't even do, basic because of specifically because of a very hypermobile SI joint, sacroiliac joint. I haven't, I can't do the basic movement of vacuuming and sweeping. Sweeping's better, but vacuuming is a disaster for that particular issue. And also, I can't walk up a hill. I mean, I can do it, but I'm going to suffer for it for weeks afterwards. And just the simple act of like bending down to pick something up, which you have to do honestly like quite often, causes me problems. So hypermobility, for me, it's a Saturn issue. Saturn needs structure and containment and discipline. And that's what I need in my body. I've injured myself at the gym also because I've done too much for my body. And again, with physical therapists and also with people who mean well, like, a personal trainer at the gym or any kind of fitness type people that are trying to help you, they don't know my body. And I've even injured myself at Pilates, and Pilates is meant to be really good for hypermobility. But if the person, doesn't understand your body and you're trying to do less rather than do more, and they think, oh, you're not trying hard enough, you're being slack, you're being lazy, push yourself. That's actually the opposite of what a hypermobile person needs to do is don't push yourself. Stop before you overdo it, which is difficult, trust me. But it's knowing and understanding, one's body and knowing that there are so many things that I can't do, and people are trying to get you to do it. And it's like, no, I can't do it. Not because I'm lazy, not because I don't know what's best for my body. It's because I do know what's best for my body. And unfortunately, I can't do what other people can do, at least not now while my body is deconditioned and still in a state of weakness, unfortunately. What is the silver lining of this? All of this stuff going on. It's honestly so depressing when you can't do what you love because of some kind of physical restriction. I would love to go out there and hula hoop like a mad woman for 2 hours. I love hula hooping, hoop dancing. So all of these like fifth house things, because Pluto was obviously in my fifth house before it came into my sixth house. The fact that I can't do these things, I can't go out to a salsa dancing class, I can't do tap dancing, I can't do all these lovely fun things that I want to do so bad. Pluto's forcing me to look at what is going on so that I can do these things. The other thing was aerial hoop I was getting into a few years back. And I injured myself multiple times on that because of hypermobility. Pluto is forcing me to deal with my hypermobility. And I feel like I've said that word 100 times, but it's forcing me to actually build up my body from the deep core out so that I can do the things that I love. Because when you can't do the things that you love, it's honestly it's such a downer. And not being able to exercise also, really affects your mental health and your ability to be optimistic and resilient. So that's what's going on for me. And it's also about lifestyle, like what kind of lifestyle do you have? What is your daily routine? What are your daily routines? For me, I had to stop working because it was giving me insomnia and I was just all over the place. Sleep is essential. Also for me, with my daily routines, because of the hypermobility, I have to start every day, because I wake up very stiff, doing, they're not like stretches, let's say, per se. They're kind of like just movement type. It's movement, flowy kind of movement. And that makes a huge difference to me. Also, the food that I eat makes a huge difference. So I've had to look at all those things and adjust my lifestyle. Spirituality is a huge thing also for me in terms of daily routines. I need to have some kind of spiritual practice in the mornings. If I don't have that, I am all over the place. So it's knowing what you need, for your daily routines so that you can build a solid foundation for the life that you want, not a life that you need to escape from and that you will go into burnout from. It's a sustainable life. It's a life that allows you, gives you the container to be the best person, the best version of you that you can be, in a way where your higher self can come through and, make the most of the time that you have on planet Earth in this lifetime. So I think that's all I'm going to say about health. And now I'm going to move on to the next section. So during this time, during this transit thus far, I've had to move a number of times. I've moved 9 times, okay, to permanent accommodation. And I've also lived in like 3 temporary accommodation places. And I also had to go overseas twice and live in a family home for 2 stints of 4 months each. And the reasons I had to move so many times, there are a few reasons. One of them is due to like relationship breakups, also a change in my relationship status. And the other reason I've had to move is because at least like 3 places that I've lived at have been sold whilst I was renting. So it forced me to move out. Suffice to say, this has been so horrible to have to move this many times. And I've also had to hire storage units at least twice. Storage units are also ruled by the 6th house, as is cleaning. It is a Virgo ruled house, so there's got to be cleaning somewhere in there. Cleaning and decluttering and sorting. All those lovely Virgo things. I'm a Virgo sun, so I don't mind some of those things, but not to the extent that I've had to deal with during the transit, that's for sure. So, what's going on? Why was Pluto like forcing me to move from house to house to house to house to storage unit to living at a friend's house to, moving into another house to going here, going there, going from like the south end of town to the northernmost suburb of town where I was like completely isolated and I was just so far out from anywhere and I couldn't do the social things that I normally did. Like what the F was going on? Sure, there was a housing crisis going on, inflation was going up and you couldn't find a place, you couldn't easily find a decent place for like a normal amount of rent per week without going way out. So what I want to say, and this might not be everyone's experience, but for me, Pluto was teaching me a massive lesson. It's to do with daily routines. Like every time you move house, it disrupts your life because you got to pack all your stuff up. You got to drive around to house viewings to find a rental that's suitable. You got to fill out all these applications. You're not necessarily going to get accepted at the first one or the second one or the third one or the fourth one or da 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 da, however long it goes on for. At one stage, I drove around to like 100 plus rental places trying to find a suitable place for me to live. A lot of them did not accept pets. So that made it a lot more difficult for me. But even if they did accept pets, it would still be extremely difficult. I've also had to deal with especially with one place that I lived at for 2 years, a very difficult Nazi style property manager that I had huge power struggles with. Um, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say with all of these house moves in terms of Pluto transiting through the sixth house of daily routines is that it taught me that I want to have sovereignty, power, autonomy, and control over the place of over my place of residence. I want to own my home and property. Because the thing is, when you don't have this and you're renting or, living with family also is another thing that I've also lived with family during this transit. I'm currently living with family during this transit temporarily. Um, when you're in that situation, the power is not in your hands. The power is in the hands of the property owners where you're renting. They can decide to sell whenever they want. In one instance, I was living with the owner of the house. I was living in the lower level. She was living in the upper level. I really liked this lady. I felt really comfortable with her. Out of the blue, she says to me, "Oh, I've got to go away for work for 9 weeks. So I'm getting a house sitter in." And the house sitter that she got was this guy from overseas, and he had a really strong, sleazy energy. So now, I'm living in this house alone with this guy. It's separate areas, but nonetheless, Pluto really brought up my fear of bodily safety with this man living above me. The other thing is, yeah, the power is in the rental agencies. If they can decide to choose you or not choose you, it's not up to you. And yeah, like I said before, I also have lived with family members in uh, less than ideal situations. And also, I've lived with partners, one partner in particular, and it's like I had nowhere to go, when things turned really between us. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have family to stay with. So, you're sort of stuck in this powerless position. And there were, a few times when I did just go away and stay at a motel. But had I owned a place, I wouldn't have had to go to a motel and I wouldn't have had to even leave my house. I would have just kicked him out, let's say. Um, so, and, this was also hard on my cat. My cat has had to move house. I've only, like I said before, I've had him for 5 years, and he's had to move house like 4 or 5 times during this transit. And that's not easy on cats. They don't necessarily like change, although he has developed resilience, I think, as a result of it. But it's not ideal, for anybody. It's very disruptive, and it costs a lot of money too. Do you know what I mean? You have to, in my case anyway, there have been times when I've had to hire movers, like I said before, hire storage units, and I've done, oh my God, pretty much every time that I've moved house, apart from the large items, I've had to move all of my stuff single-handedly. And it's been really taxing on my body and my mind. In addition, I'm talking about multiple entry and exit cleans of these rental properties that I've been in. Keeping on with the theme of cleaning, decluttering, and sorting during this transit, I've had to, with work actually, totally declutter 2 offices and also my ex-partner's apartment. We blasted his apartment, completely decluttered all of these like stuff that had been there for like 20 years. It was, yeah, truckloads of trailer loads at least of stuff. I also relocated from one country to another during this transit. I went back home. And I had to declutter all of my stuff that I'd accumulated for like 15 years. It was a huge job. Um, and I had to basically sell all of my stuff before I moved over because shipping costs are just astronomical and not worth it anymore. And there was another house that I also had to declutter that, had stuff in there. God, stuff that had been in there really since like nearly 40 years. And cleaning was a part of one job that I was in. There was a property also where I had to do very regular cleaning for house viewings. So, all in all, just a lot more cleaning, decluttering, and sorting than normal. Um, I also wanted to go back to health briefly. I forgot to mention something in relation to the physical aspect of work affecting me. So I tried to do a couple of jobs at least where it was more of a physical, like a manual labor type job. Um, I mean, labor might be a bit too strong a word for what I did, but anyways, one of them was sorting produce in a factory, and the other one was doing stock taking. And I actually didn't mind either of these jobs. I kind of enjoyed, especially with the stock taking, it was very black and white and it was kind of mindless and it just included a lot of counting. And a part of my brain really enjoys that. I find it quite meditative and relaxing just to do the same thing over and over again and not really have to think too hard. Um, that sounds bad, but you know what I mean. I hope. Anyway, so I really enjoyed the stock taking job, and I thought, oh, maybe I could do stock taking. And I only did the job like a few days, let's say over a few weeks. But even just from doing that, because of my hypermobility issues, I ended up developing RSI patterns through my body that I'm still trying to work through now. And that was like probably 2 years ago that I did this work. And with the sorting job that I did at this factory, just after a few days of doing the job that I was doing, I literally had to just lie on the hard floor. I lay down, I was in so much pain. And this is beyond just like physical pain of doing, movement that you're not used to. This is something completely different to that. Um, I lay down on the hard floor and I could not move. I was like, it was like I was paralyzed and I just had to lay there for ages and ages and ages. And I just couldn't move. It was quite scary, to be honest. Eventually, I did manage to get off the floor, but I had to stop doing that work because of that. It was just completely not sustainable. And I was quite disappointed because I thought, oh, I could just do these manual jobs. I'd be happy doing that. I don't really care. You know, um, it wouldn't affect my mental health, but unfortunately, it affected my physical health. Or maybe not, unfortunately. Maybe it's fortunately, because again, it's forcing me to go, I don't want to work for other people. I want to work for myself and I want to work for home in my conditions, on my terms. So that's all I'm going to say on that. Also, with daily routines, I quickly want to touch on the fact that I did, I've already touched on it just briefly, that I did do different studies, not exactly covered normally under sixth house, but it did change my daily routines. And they are related to the sixth house of health. So, like I mentioned before, I did yoga teacher training both for adults and for children. I did also hula hoop teacher training. it's to do with fitness and health. I did a qualification in business, which is businesses, governed by Saturn and Capricorn, which is where Pluto's been transiting through. And I have touched on some eighth house Plutonian subjects, such as studying astrology, studying tarot, and doing also a little bit of shamanism, studying shamanic um, practices. I also did, and I don't know how these fit in, but I also did a theatre course and I did a permaculture design course. So I've done lots of different things in the realm of study as well, which has, at different times has altered my daily routines because I had to go to these courses and do different stuff, travel as well in some instances to be able to do these courses. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to pets, and that includes pets at work. Generally speaking, in my life, compared to this transit, I haven't had like a lot to do with pets, but my interaction with pets increased a lot during this transit. Like I mentioned before, it's the first time that no, actually, I didn't mention that before. This is the first time as an adult that I've had a pet, a cat. And he started off as a foster cat, fostering being service. And service is also ruled under the sixth house, also rules service. So I started off doing the service of being a foster mum. But I ended up adopting him because I fell in love with him and I didn't want to break his little sweetheart. So I've had him for 5 years. Also, at one of my jobs, there was actually a dog that lived at the place of work 24/7. He lived there and he would just hang out in the office with us. I also, just generally speaking, have had more to do with animals, whether it was through partners. My ex-husband had a dog, and unfortunately, he died a week after I left, which was, yeah, quite bad timing. Let's say another partner that I was with, and his family, they had 4 different dogs, and one of them sadly passed as he was attacked viciously by another dog in the neighborhood, just, completely unprovoked. Whilst I was in another place of residence, the lady who owned the house, who went away for work, she had a lovely cat, and the house sitter who came in was supposed to look after him as part of his duties. But this poor cat had PTSD with males, so I ended up taking care of this cat, and I really enjoyed it. And perhaps it was what sparked me to, want cats in my life more and eventually adopt a cat of my own. Also, I have taken care of some stray cats when I lived overseas for those 2 4-month stints. And where I live currently, actually, there is another cat in the house, which belongs to my family member. So, generally speaking, just a lot more to do with pets. And I have a really interesting story, actually, that connects pets and work. I did this temporary job where I was delivering physical phone books, believe it or not, around the neighborhood. And I've always had a great a phobia actually, of dogs because of a couple of scary experiences that I had as a young kid with dogs. But I really wanted to do this temporary job, and it ended up being actually a form of exposure therapy for me to go deep, go into Plutonian depths, go into the fear that I had of dogs. Like I was so scared when I was delivering these books that I was going to get attacked by a dog. I was full freaking out. And there are a lot of dogs where I was doing this particular job. Like pretty much every house, or at least every second house for sure, had a dog. Um, but I used this as an opportunity to work through my phobia, and I don't have a fear of dogs anymore because of it. It was just a really amazing way that the planetary energies came together for me to be able to have this opportunity to break through the fear and work through it. Yeah, yeah, it's the sixth house of work and pets, Pluto to do with fear and transformation and empowerment. So yeah, it was a really cool experience actually for me, and I'm really glad that I did it. The next topic I want to talk about is generally talking about Plutonian beginnings, but more so to do with Plutonian endings. So in the jobs that I left, there generally was no closure and there were just burnt bridges. Like I didn't want to burn a bridge, but it's just how it pretty much has ended up almost every single time. And it's happened in a very similar way also with relationships with people. I've had a lot of endings with all sorts of people. I'm not just talking about relationships, but also friendships and, people that I was co-workers as well. I mean, you do generally get close to people that you work with because you see them so often. Um, so I'm going to briefly touch on that. I had like at least, just going to quickly count this, like let's say 9 or 10 friendships go bust during this time. That's a lot, in 11 years. Um, Also, two very explosive, let's say, relationship endings, including endings with one of my ex-partners. I was very close to his family members. They were like they were like my adopted family because I wasn't living in the same country as my family at the time. At least, 8 of those family members, I was really close with them. And then just out of the blue, they just, yeah, cut me off. Um, so I find that a lot of times with these kind of Plutonian endings, things just get cut off and you don't get closure. You don't get to say goodbye. It's just done. And it's horrible. And the other people are not necessarily willing to talk about it once it's done. They just go no contact. Um, I've also come across at least 3 narcissists. Yeah, it's been quite painful to get excited about meeting someone and think, oh, this might turn into a good friendship. But it's been scary, when you actually see someone for who they are and you see that they are a narcissist, a true, person struggling with NPD. It's scary. It's very scary. And, Pluto is about fear and also, seeing things for what they are, not sugarcoating. Pluto takes no prisoners. It just, things that are not for your highest and best good, they just get destroyed and go out of your life. Um, I've also had some interesting experiences with a couple of therapists. One was a psychologist that I ended up having, instead of having like a therapy session with her, it turned into a power struggle between me and her, and basically a 1 hour argument that I had to pay $180 for. Um, and yeah, with another therapist, things just, yeah, suffice to say, a lot of kind of underhand things happen. I want to share one example where I went to a hula hoop retreat overseas. I was so excited to go to this thing. I get there and things reveal themselves almost right away. as being shady. Suddenly the event wasn't being held at the venue that it was meant to be held. It was held at some person's house. We went to this person's house and basically discovered that even though this lady, the organizer, had taken everybody's money for the course and for accommodation, she had, in her words, mismanaged the funds. In my words, stolen the funds, but worded it in such a way like, feel sorry for me, I'm a good person, and let's just still try and make it happen, but you have to pay for your own accommodation, like for the second time. And it was just such a Plutonian experience of like, what the heck is going on? Most people were sucked into her charm, I suppose. And luckily, I was able to see through it, as were a couple of other people, and I got all my money back from her because, she was in the wrong. I'm not going to lose money because you mismanaged my money. It's not my problem. But, there was a lot of secrecy involved in that. No one knew anything about what was going on until they actually flew to this place from all over the world, mind you, and then discovered, oh, sorry, you don't have anywhere to stay. You're going to have to fork out money to pay for your accommodation for the second time. Anyway, whatever the case, I just wanted to mention that, as an interesting example of, hey, I was out there doing something for my health and my fitness and sixth house kind of theme that turned into something quite different. So Pluto can be scary, definitely, but Pluto is here to help us. Whatever is not serving your highest and best good, for whatever reason, Pluto is going to cut out of your life to make room for something that is in alignment with your highest self, with your most empowered self. So when I first started looking at this transit, it was difficult for me to understand, what's really going on for me with Pluto moving through my sixth house. It was not clear at all. I was like, oh yeah, health. I don't know, nothing drastic's happening with my health. Work. I don't know. I can't really pin it down. I mean, yeah, I haven't been able to stay in a job for long, but what else? It seemed really vague to me. Unlike other transits, I think that certain transits through certain houses, certain planets, and certain zodiacs are a lot easier than others. This one was not easy. So I went and did a deep dive, a Plutonian deep dive over the past 11 years of my life as related to all of these themes, sixth house themes. And I was able to see what was really going on and what Pluto is trying to teach me. Thank goodness. And I wasn't also, when I was researching this, I wasn't able to find a lot of information online, especially with regards to first-hand experience. Like, what was it for you, as opposed to, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. Personally, I find it really helpful when I can listen to someone's first-hand experience. And this is why I've done this video. And I hope that it's helpful for you to discover, what does this mean for you? Or what does it mean for your clients, or like friends and family that perhaps are going through this same transit? Also, it's interesting that now that Pluto has moved into Aquarius, that whole energy of the sixth house is going to have an Aquarian take on it. Capricorn, both Capricorn and Aquarius are ruled by Saturn, so there's still going to be that Saturn influence. But in addition to that, because Aquarius is also ruled by Uranus, there's going to be a Uranian energy overlay with the sixth house Pluto transit. And what I've noticed thus far, because it hasn't been going on for that long, is I've just really gone into doing Kundalini yoga. Kundalini yoga is very much, ruled by Uranus. Uranus is the electrical energy, lightning type energy of Kundalini. And I'm really enjoying being able to uh, sink into that, because during this is a really difficult time, for everybody astrologically, whether you have Pluto and transiting through the sixth house or not. If you just look at all the other planets and what they're doing collectively, if you're not struggling, like, I'm going to be surprised, right? Um, there are so many deep changes that are happening right now. I hope that this has been helpful and useful for you to have, my firsthand experience. And I hope that it's helped you to think about your own life and how this is working in your world. And I would love to hear about, any experiences of mine that you've resonated with, and any other experiences that you've had. What's been going on for your life with regards to pets and pets at work? What's been going on in your life to do with work, paid or unpaid? What's been going on in health? And specifically look at like Capricorn and Saturn themes and Plutonian themes. What's going on in terms of your skin, your bones, chronic conditions that you might have. What's been going on in terms of Plutonian themes, fear, power, control. Who has control over you? And how can you empower yourself away from that? So yeah, please drop me a comment if you feel that you would like to. I would love to read what everybody else is going through, and I will leave it at that for now. And I hope to see you another time.